What if I told you that the greatest threat to Prince William that night didn't come from an outside enemy, a foreign rival, or even a deranged fan, but from inside his own family? What if the most disturbing discovery made after the Royal Variety performance wasn't captured on stage, in the crowd, or in any tabloid headline, but underneath his car? Let that sit for a second. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because this isn't a rumor. This isn't one of those palace whispers people brush aside as gossip. This is bigger, darker, more calculated. Something that made William, a man trained his entire life to remain calm under pressure, go silent, step back, and demand a private briefing from top security officials. Something that made even the police hesitate before giving him the full explanation. Let me ask you a question. When you think of royal danger, what comes to mind? Paparazzi? Protesters? Maybe a rogue driver trying to get too close? But what about a professionally installed tracker, hidden in a way only intelligence contractors know how to do, sitting directly under William's vehicle? That's where this story begins, with silence. Not screams, not flashing cameras, just silence. The kind of silence that happens when trained security realizes something is wrong before the rest of the world does. Picture this. It's the end of the Royal Variety Performance 2025. The crowd is buzzing. Cameras are everywhere. William steps out with the practiced ease he's mastered since childhood, smiling, waving, acknowledging the audience. Everything appears perfectly normal. But normal didn't last long. The moment he reaches the car, one of his senior security officers stops. Not abruptly, professionally, but with tension you can't mistake. His body shifts slightly. His hand moves toward William, almost instinctively, as if shielding him from something they can't even see yet. The second guard glances at the undercarriage, pretending to check something trivial. A third agent discreetly signals to someone off camera. To the public, it looks like a minor delay. To them, it was a warning sign. And then comes the question nobody expected to hear over the comms that night. Is this ours? That single sentence set the tone for everything that followed. Because the thing attached to the car wasn't one of theirs. It wasn't any known piece of tracking equipment used by royal protection teams. It wasn't cheap, either. This wasn't some off-the-shelf GPS device you can buy on the internet. This was something else. Something expensive, discreet, advanced, and designed to be undetectable without a specific scanning frequency. A device normally used by private intelligence firms. And the best part? Whoever put it there knew exactly what they were doing. The installation was clean, methodical, hidden in a spot that only a professional would ever consider. Now here's where things get even darker. When police later examined the tracker, they found a manufacturing ID, a code, a signature. Something that every professional device has, even if it's buried under layers of encryption. And when they cross-referenced that ID in case it had shown up in any previous investigation, only one match appeared. Equipment used by a private security contractor that Queen Camilla's team had hired for a royal event months earlier. Coincidence? That's what some wanted to believe. But inside the palace, coincidence stopped being an acceptable answer years ago. Because here's what most people forget. The royal family doesn't just live under public scrutiny. They live under internal scrutiny. Rivalries, historical tensions, shifting alliances, political pressures, personal resentments. When you add all that together, you get a world where a single move can change everything. Sometimes intentionally, sometimes accidentally, sometimes out of pure survival instinct. And on that night, after that discovery, something shifted inside William. He wasn't angry, not at first. Anger comes later. No, he was shaken, genuinely shaken, because he understood what this meant. Someone with access, someone with knowledge, someone with resources wanted to track him. Not observe him from afar, not monitor an event, but follow him. Think about that. If someone tracks your car, they're not just curious about where you were. They want to know where you go when nobody's watching. The places you don't post online. The people you meet quietly. The decisions you make without cameras, advisors, or press releases. Tracking is intrusion. Tracking is intent. Tracking is motive. So the question becomes, what was the motive? And why did the trail, even loosely, point toward a contractor previously linked to Camilla's circle? But before we jump into that, let's rewind for a moment. Because to understand why this discovery nearly triggered a full-scale internal crisis, you need to understand the atmosphere inside the monarchy at this point in 2025. William and Camilla were not aligned. Not politically, not domestically, not in the subtle, unspoken hierarchy of influence. Those close to the palace already knew that the two had incompatible leadership styles. William prefers structure, transparency, and stability. Camilla prefers discretion, influence, and flexibility. Different mindsets, different values, different priorities. Over the previous year, tensions had quietly escalated. Disagreements over staff, over protocol, over how public appearances should be managed, and most importantly, over who gets access to strategic information. Camilla had built her own network, her own advisors, her own external contractors. William saw this as a problem. Camilla saw it as necessary. When worlds collide, someone always flinches first. But back to the tracker. After the initial discovery, security ordered the car immobilized. No one touched it. No one approached it except the designated investigation unit. William was guided into a secondary vehicle, one that was scanned twice before he even stepped inside. His face was controlled, but there was something in his expression. Something tight. Something focused. He didn't say much during the ride. He didn't need to. The people around him sensed it. The shift, the tension, the calculation. William's silence speaks louder than most people's outrage. When he arrived behind closed palace doors, his first action was requesting an immediate report. Not from royal security, not from the palace press, but from the intelligence liaison team. That choice alone was a message. He wanted the truth, unfiltered, unedited, without palace politics diluting the facts. What did the experts tell him? They told him the tracker wasn't placed by an amateur. They told him it required access that only authorized personnel could have. They told him it was likely installed within a specific 6-minute window. They told him the device was identical to models used in sensitive monitoring operations. They told him the ID code matched a contractor with ties to Camilla's previous private team. And then they asked William the one question he hoped he'd never hear. Is there anyone close to the royal household who would benefit from monitoring your movements? This wasn't just about danger. It wasn't just about privacy. It wasn't even about security. It was about trust. And when trust breaks inside the monarchy, consequences spread fast. But here's where things start spiraling into something bigger than any of them expected. Because after officers removed the primary device, something else happened. Something they didn't plan for. Something they didn't expect. The car was swept again, a routine precaution. And that's when they found it. A second signal. A second device. A second installation. Hidden deeper. Smaller. Smarter. Harder to detect. It wasn't a tracker. It was something else. Something even more disturbing. But before I reveal what that second device was, and why it changed the entire investigation, you need to understand the one moment that triggered a wave of internal panic. The moment William asked a simple, loaded question. Who hired them? That's the question that made two advisors exchange glances. That's the question that made the investigator pause before answering. That's the question that nearly cracked the wall of silence inside the palace. Because the contractor in question wasn't just any security firm. They were part of Camilla's team months earlier. And William knew it. He didn't say it out loud. He didn't accuse anyone. He didn't need to. His silence did it for him. But here's the part nobody was prepared for. Not the public, not the staff, not even the investigators tracking every detail. The device's last recorded data timestamp matched the exact moment William exited the venue, meaning whoever placed it didn't want historical data. They wanted real-time information, immediate tracking, immediate monitoring, immediate access. Now let me ask you, who tracks someone in real time? Someone afraid? Someone paranoid? Or someone planning something? And who inside the palace would have the means and the audacity to use a contractor connected to Camilla? This is where the story transforms from unsettling to explosive. Because the deeper the investigators dug, the more the evidence pointed in one direction. Not proven, not confirmed, but implied, strongly implied, too strongly to ignore. And William? He felt it. He saw it. He knew it. And that's exactly why he took the next step. A step that would expose a secret no one expected, rip open a hidden conflict inside the monarchy, and uncover a second device far more dangerous than the first. a device that made the tracker look harmless in comparison. The palace went into what insiders call a quiet lockdown. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies. No alarms, no rushing guards, no visible panic. The royal family has mastered the art of staying composed even when the walls are burning behind them. Instead, subtle measures began to ripple through the system. Staff were reassigned. Clearances were adjusted. Doors that were always unlocked suddenly required ID. 2 corridors were rerouted without explanation. And all of it quietly. Because the most dangerous stories inside the palace are never the loud ones. They're the silent ones. The ones where everyone senses something is wrong, but nobody dares ask the question out loud. Yet behind those polished corridors and carefully curated smiles, something was unraveling. And it began with a late-night meeting in one of the smaller briefing rooms, a space deliberately chosen because it's soundproofed, unmonitored, and rarely used for anything short of emergencies. William didn't bring advisors. He didn't bring family. He didn't bring press handlers. Just 3 people. The head intelligence liaison, the security technician who recovered the device, and the investigator who traced the manufacturing ID. What was said in that room is still classified, but we know what happened when William walked out. For the first time in years, he didn't greet staff in the hallway. He didn't smile. He didn't offer the polite nod he always gives, the softening gesture of a man trying to lead by example. Instead, he walked with a focus that was almost cold, not angry, not emotional, determined, because what he learned wasn't just disturbing. It was unprecedented. The second device wasn't a tracker. It wasn't designed to map his route or follow his movements. It had a different purpose entirely. And when the technician showed William the preliminary breakdown of the device's components, his reaction said everything. The device was capable of recording interior cabin noise. Not professionally, not cleanly, not in high definition, but enough to capture conversations, enough to capture arguments, enough to capture decisions, enough to capture secrets. And that's when this story goes from surveillance to sabotage. Because installing one device is risky. Installing 2 is reckless. Installing an audio capture device? That's strategic. Ask yourself, who would want to hear what William says in the privacy of his car? Who would need that level of access? Who would risk exposure to acquire it? The question wasn't who could do it. The question was who would. This changed the threat profile completely. It wasn't a security breach anymore. It was an intelligence operation, one aimed at a member of the monarchy. And that meant one thing. The person behind this didn't want to track where William went. They wanted to know what he was planning. This is the moment investigators expanded the timeline. If the device was newer, smaller, more advanced, it might have been installed separately from the first one. Possibly by a different person. Possibly on a different day. Possibly for a different reason. 2 motives. 2 devices. 1 target. This wasn't random. And now the palace had a bigger problem. The audio device had recorded something. And before anything could be analyzed, the data wiped itself. Automatically, the moment it was disconnected from the vehicle. Fail-safe technology. Professional level. Not available to the public. This wasn't amateur work. This was organized. So what happens next? William wanted a list. A simple list. One with names of every single person who had come near the cars, not just that night, but in the 72 hours before the Royal Variety performance. This is where things begin to shift from suspicious to explosive. Because when the access logs were pulled, something strange appeared. A 12-minute gap, erased, altered, or corrupted. Nobody could explain it. The system had redundancies. Backups. Mirrors. Mirrors of mirrors. These logs aren't supposed to vanish. But they did. Conveniently. Precisely. Predictably. A device is installed. A log disappears. An audio recorder powers down in self-delete mode. And then the most damning detail. The missing log window perfectly matches the device installation window estimated by the technicians. How does that happen without someone inside the system participating? This is the moment William stopped being shaken. This is the moment he became suspicious. And suspicion is far more dangerous than fear, especially inside a monarchy where alliances matter more than truth, and loyalties can shift with a single whispered rumor. But here's where this story twists again. When the technician cross-referenced the timestamps of nearby cameras, ones not connected to the primary palace system, something unbelievable surfaced. A shadow. A silhouette. A figure walking near the vehicle during the missing log window. Not a guard. Not a staff member. Not a driver. Someone unauthorized. Someone who walked with the confidence of someone who belonged, but shouldn't have been there. Someone who moved like they were trained to avoid attention, not attract it. This image, according to insiders, was immediately compared to the list of external contractors who had been granted temporary access in the last year. One match. Only one. And that match was connected to a private security firm Queen Camilla had hired for an event 3 months earlier. And now the question becomes impossible to ignore. Why does someone tied to her team appear near William's car during the exact window a surveillance device was installed? Some say coincidence. Some say sabotage. Some say power struggle. But William didn't see coincidence. He saw motive. Because the tracker wasn't designed to harm him physically. It was designed to monitor him. To anticipate his decisions. To watch his movements. To gather information that could be used not just inside the palace, but against him. Now pause for a moment. Imagine being William. Imagine realizing someone you sit beside at family events. Someone who smiles at you in public. Someone who shares royal duties with you. Might be gathering intelligence on you behind the scenes. Imagine understanding that this isn't just about a device. It's about trust, control, power, succession politics, internal fractures. And then imagine discovering that this wasn't the first time something like this happened, merely the first time it was caught. Because yes, investigators uncovered more. A pattern, a timeline, an escalation, and one detail that made William question everything. The tracker model had been used once before, and the match was tied directly to a Camilla-associated event. So now William had a disturbing possibility in front of him. Either Camilla's team was being sabotaged, or Camilla's team was involved. Both options are explosive. Both options tear open the monarchy's internal stability. Both options force William into a position he never wanted, suspecting his own stepmother. This is when he made a decision that shocked even his closest advisors. He asked for something that no one expected. Something only 2 people in the monarchy have the authority to request. Something that would change the entire investigation. But what William demanded next would push this quiet palace crisis into a direction no one saw coming, and unravel a secret that had been buried long before the tracker was ever found. And that secret? Not another meeting. Not a public statement. Not a staff reshuffle. He demanded a full internal intelligence audit. Not of the palace. Not of his own team. Not of the external contractor. He demanded an audit of Camilla's private security network. The team she uses outside the official royal channels. The same team linked to the contractor whose device ID matched the tracker on his car. This was unheard of. Members of the royal family rarely cross into each other's security territories because it sends a message, a very clear one. I do not trust you. And trust between senior royals is not just emotional. It's political. It's structural. It shapes everything from staff loyalty to media narratives to international relationships. So when William requested that audit, the tension inside the palace became almost physical. Advisors felt it. Staff felt it. Even the household guards, trained to ignore internal drama, sensed something was shifting in the air. Because William wasn't just investigating a device anymore. He was investigating a possibility that someone inside the royal family, or aligned with one, wanted access to his private movements and conversations. And that's the kind of suspicion you can never walk back from. But here's where the story widens. Because the moment William requested that audit, resistance began. Subtle at first, polite, carefully phrased, wrapped in language that sounded helpful on the surface. We should postpone this until more data is processed. Perhaps it's better to review options privately first. Maybe the contractor match was a coincidence. Shouldn't we involve the king before escalating this further? These weren't questions. These were warnings. And William recognized them instantly. Because here's something the public misunderstands about him. He's not just a future king. He's also someone raised inside an institution that values strategy over emotion. He was trained to see the subtleties, the redirections, the soft nose disguised as thoughtful suggestions. So the resistance didn't slow him down. It fueled him. Because resistance means someone is afraid of what he might find. And William? He's many things. Diplomatic, careful, measured. But he is not someone who backs down once he believes something threatens his family or his position. So he pushed. Harder. He insisted on access. He demanded documentation. He requested unedited reports. This is where the investigation took its most dramatic turn. Real paperwork always has friction, conflicting timestamps, messy handwriting, outdated memos, small errors. But this file, it read like a polished press release. Sanitized, stripped, almost rehearsed. It was the absence of disorder that raised alarms. So investigators dug deeper. Quietly, they requested older logs, backdated contracts, archived communications, things no one thought would still exist. Except some of them did exist. On external servers no one realized were still storing data. And these archives revealed something unexpected. Camilla's team had hired the same contractor twice. Not once, twice. The second contract had never been publicly recorded, never filed in the usual palace system, never disclosed to general royal security. It was private, authority unknown, purpose ambiguous. That alone was suspicious. But the real shock came when investigators looked at the invoice attached to the hidden contract. Equipment listed. Temporary mobile monitoring units. The same phrase used in the whistleblower file. The same phrase connected to the tracker batch. The same phrase investigators saw earlier. But this version contained a purchase date. And that purchase date? 2 weeks before the Royal Variety performance. Let that sink in. 2 weeks before. The tracker was installed on the night of the event. But the equipment order, the private equipment order, happened days earlier. That means this wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't opportunistic. This wasn't a last-minute act. This was prepared. But prepared by who? Camilla herself? Her staff? A rogue contractor? A political friend? A rival faction trying to make her look guilty? Suddenly, the investigation was no longer simple. It was layered, possibly orchestrated, possibly misdirected. William realized this too. His suspicion shifted from personal betrayal to a larger concern. Could someone inside or around the palace be manipulating events to fracture the monarchy internally? Because nothing weakens an institution faster than internal distrust. But then something happened that changed the entire tone of the investigation. A detail so subtle, so easily overlooked, yet so devastating that one of the investigators reportedly said, "This is where everything began to click." It came from a routine background check on the contractor. A name, a signature, a list of past clients. And among those clients, documented, verified, recorded, was an entity that should never have appeared in a royal intelligence investigation. A foreign political consultant with a history of using discreet surveillance equipment. And who had introduced that consultant to the contractor? A member of Camilla's staff during an event overseas. Suddenly the web widened. This wasn't just palace drama anymore. This was geopolitical. But let's not jump ahead. Because another detail emerged around this time. Something far closer, far more personal, far more explosive. Remember that unauthorized silhouette captured by a camera near William's car? The one that didn't match any palace staff? The one that moved with the posture of someone trained to avoid detection? When investigators ran advanced pattern analysis on that silhouette, frame comparison, gait recognition, shoulder width assessment, they narrowed it down not to one person, but 3. 3 potential matches. 2 were dismissed. 1 remained. That one, a former security operative who had been dismissed from a project connected to, once again, Camilla's team. The pattern was becoming undeniable. But here's the part that truly rattled William. And insiders say this is the moment he stopped assuming coincidence and began assuming intent. The former operative disappeared from public records 3 days before the Royal Variety performance. Not died, not imprisoned, not officially missing, simply untraceable. No social media, no bank activity, no travel logs, like someone who had been told to disappear, or paid to, or compelled to. The deeper investigators dug, the tighter the noose became, not around a single person, but around a network. A network attached to a specific royal office, whether by intent or by manipulation. And William? He wasn't just disturbed now. He felt targeted. Because someone had crossed a line. A deeply personal line. You don't monitor the future king's private movements accidentally. You don't install an audio device accidentally. You don't erase logs accidentally. But the real question, the question that would take this entire story from shocking to catastrophic, was the one investigators hadn't yet asked. Why William? Why now? Why this event? What was happening behind palace doors that made someone believe they needed to track the next monarch's every move? Because the truth, the real truth, wouldn't come from the device, or the contractor, or the silhouette. It would come from something William said privately that same night. A phrase overheard by one of his closest advisors. A phrase that revealed everything about how he interpreted the situation. He said, "This wasn't about where I'm going. It's about what I'm planning." What was he planning? Why would someone need to preempt his decisions? What did he know that someone else feared? Because the closer investigators got to the core of the conspiracy, the more it became clear. This wasn't about surveillance. This was about power. But beneath that calm surface, the palace was holding its breath. Because by dawn, investigators had already uncovered something that shifted the entire narrative. Something that didn't just add a new layer to the mystery. It tore open the foundation of the previous day's conclusions. And it all began with a file. Not a digital file. Not an encrypted database. A physical file. A folder placed in a storage drawer that should have been empty, cataloged under a name no longer associated with any active staff. And the only reason investigators found it was because someone left that drawer unlocked. People inside the palace insist it wasn't carelessness. It was a message. Inside the folder was a stack of handwritten notes, printed emails, and contractor forms dating back 18 months. Notes that were incomplete, sloppy, irregular. Exactly the opposite of the clean documents Camilla's office had provided the night before. But the real shock? Several of those documents referenced the same contractor whose tracker model ended up under William's car. But this wasn't Camilla's paperwork. It was William's. More specifically, it belonged to a staff member formerly assigned to William's communications team, a staff member who had resigned abruptly 6 months earlier. The palace had always claimed it was a routine departure, but these documents suggested something far more complicated. There were notes about security disagreements, requests denied without explanation, meetings canceled abruptly, concerns raised about external involvement, warnings written in rushed handwriting, too many outside parties, not safe, someone is using our channels, check vehicle access, and then a final line, smudged but legible. He doesn't know. Who didn't know? William? The team? Someone higher? The ambiguity made the message even more unsettling, because up until that moment, everyone thought the contractor link pointed toward Camilla. But this new discovery suggested something else. Someone had been monitoring William far longer than anyone realized, and they may have used both sides of the palace to do it. A rogue network? A faction? A political influencer? A hybrid of internal and external actors? Whatever it wasn't simple sabotage anymore. It wasn't even about Camilla alone. It was bigger, possibly spanning multiple parts of the royal household. But the most chilling detail was still coming. Because as investigators cross-checked the timestamps on the newly discovered notes, they noticed something disturbing. The staff members' final entries were written just days before they quit, and the tracker discovered on William's car? It matched a batch produced during that same period, meaning the first device might not have been installed at the Royal Variety Performance at all, meaning the tracker might have been installed months ago and no one noticed until now, meaning William had been monitored long before he realized. This shifted everything. If the device had been there longer, the motive expanded. Someone wasn't just looking for one night's movements. They were building a pattern, a map of his habits, his routines, his secret schedules, his meetings. That's not surveillance. That's live intelligence. And now the investigators had a terrifying new question. Was the Royal Variety Performance installation the second phase, not the first? Meanwhile, William was processing all of this privately. He hadn't slept. He hadn't rested. Those near him said he looked exhausted, not physically, but mentally, emotionally, and geopolitically. Because the deeper this went, the more he realized the truth. Someone wanted to anticipate his ascent to power, and that meant someone feared what he intended to do as king. But before he could even get answers, another wave of revelation hit. Another discovery. Another red flag. Another twist. This time, it came from the data wipes. Remember those erased access logs? The ones conveniently missing from the exact minutes the tracker was installed? Investigators finally recovered fragments. Tiny bits of corrupted metadata. Scraps that should have been unrecoverable. But they weren't completely destroyed. And while the names were gone, the device signatures were not. The palace uses a system where every badge, keycard, and access tool has a unique digital fingerprint, a ghost signature. If someone tries to erase logs, the ghost signature still remains in the hardware cache. And what did investigators find? Two ghost signatures, two separate access tools, both used within the same 12-minute window. That means two people were present, two installers, two coordinated entries, which destroys the lone operative theory entirely. Now we're dealing with a team, a plan, a coordinated operation. And here's the twist that made this even worse. Both ghost signatures belong to devices registered to the royal household. Not outsiders, not contractors, not intruders. Internal badges, internal clearances, internal access. Someone who worked inside the palace had either participated in or allowed the tracker installation. And William? He had expected betrayal from outside. He had anticipated the possibility of sabotage. He had even prepared himself to suspect Camilla's team. But inside his own circle? Inside the household he oversaw? Inside the security layers he trusted? This was a new kind of threat, one that wasn't just personal. It was structural. This is when he said something to an investigator that leaked to the public a few days later. Something that reveals exactly how he viewed the situation. If they can tag my car, they can tag my children. That sentence changed everything. Because when a future king feels his family is at risk, diplomacy ends. Politeness ends. Restraint ends. From that moment on, the investigation stopped being discreet and became urgent. Urgency exposes things. Urgency cracks walls. Urgency makes people slip. And that's exactly what happened next. One person slipped. A single staff member. One who worked within Camilla's extended administrative circle, panicked, requested emergency leave, and tried to leave London within hours of the second device being discovered. But they didn't make it out of the country. Not because they were arrested. Not because they were detained. But because an internal security officer questioned them. Just one question, and their reaction gave everything away. Their hands shook. Their voice cracked. Their story contradicted itself 3 times in 2 minutes. This wasn't guilt. This was fear. Fear of being caught. Or fear of something. Or someone else. That's what investigators wondered too. Because this person wasn't a technician. They weren't security personnel. They weren't even senior staff. They were administrative support. So why were they so afraid? Unless they knew something they shouldn't. Unless they had seen something they weren't meant to see. Unless the tracker wasn't the real operation, but a symptom of something bigger. Because when investigators pulled their digital records, they found something unexpected. This staff member had accessed a restricted internal memo 4 months earlier. A memo titled, Succession Scenario Restructuring Draft. A memo that referenced William. A memo that referenced future transitions. A memo that referenced strategic information flow. And that memo originated from Camilla's office. Suddenly, everything connected. The contractor, the private equipment order, the silhouette, the ghost signatures, the audio device, the administrative panic, the memo about restructuring. This wasn't random. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't personal jealousy or petty rivalry. This was political. Someone, somewhere inside the royal structure, was preparing for a shift in power and needed to know William's moves in advance. But the most disturbing part still hasn't been revealed. Because later that afternoon, after hours of reviewing documents, timelines, and interviews, investigators brought something to William's attention. A pattern that no one had seen before. A detail connecting the device location to something found inside the car itself. A small object. Something overlooked. Something insignificant at first glance. But when examined closely, it changed the meaning of everything that had happened so far. And what they found inside the car would send the investigation spiraling into a revelation so shocking that even the intelligence team hesitated before reporting it to William. Not a device. Not a wire. Not a tool. Something far more subtle. Something almost invisible. A fragment. A tiny, almost weightless piece of polymer coating wedged between the passenger seat and the center console. So small it could have been dismissed as lint, dust, or debris from the upholstery. The kind of thing no one notices unless they're searching for microscopic clues. But forensic technicians know better. They lifted it carefully, examined it under magnification, and then froze. The coating wasn't from the car. It wasn't from anything William owned. It wasn't from the tracker. It wasn't from the audio device. It belonged to a third piece of equipment. A piece of equipment that was never recovered. A device that had been removed before investigators arrived. Meaning whoever installed the trackers came back. They didn't just plant surveillance. They retrieved something. And suddenly, the Royal Variety performance wasn't the beginning. It wasn't even the middle. It was merely the moment the operation slipped. Think about that. If the fragment belonged to a third device, that means a device was installed. A device was used. A device was quietly extracted, without anyone noticing. This changed the investigation completely. The first tracker told investigators someone wanted to follow William. The second device suggested someone wanted to hear William. But the third device? That meant someone wanted to take something. Information, audio, patterns, secrets. Something important enough to risk entering the vehicle twice. But what? That's what William wanted to know. And the answer was far more disturbing than anyone expected. Because when tech teams reconstructed the chemical signature of the polymer trace, they identified the category of equipment it belonged to. A data extraction module. Let me repeat that. A device capable of copying digital data, phones, tablets, key fobs, encrypted logs, even vehicle telematics, in under 10 seconds of proximity. Meaning, if William kept his phone in the car that night, if he left it charging for even a moment, if he stored secure contacts, encrypted messages, or confidential planning notes inside it, a foreign device could have copied them. This discovery hit William harder than anything else. Not because he feared public scandal, not because he worried about leaks, but because he understood the true implication. Someone wasn't collecting general information. They were collecting strategic information. His plans, his meetings, his alliances, his conversations with officials and advisors, his preparedness for his future role. This wasn't an invasion of privacy. This was an invasion of monarchy. You see, for the public, royalty is pageantry, ceremony, tradition. But behind the scenes, the future king holds influence, political, diplomatic, national, international. He meets with intelligence chiefs, global leaders, military strategists. His movements matter. His decisions shape national direction. And someone wanted access to those decisions before he made them. But here's where the story takes a sharp, unexpected turn. When William learned a third device had been placed and removed, he didn't erupt. He didn't lash out. He didn't accuse. He did something far scarier. He became calm. Dead calm. A kind of calm that comes from someone who finally understands the scale of the threat they face. And that calmness terrified those around him. Because William reached one conclusion. A conclusion he voiced privately, one that leaked only days later through a palace insider. They're not just watching me. They're preparing for something. Preparing for what? A shift in influence? A restructuring of roles? A preemptive maneuver to shape future power? Or something even bigger? Something tied to succession? This is where the internal intelligence audit went from precaution to crisis mode. Because the more angles the investigators examined, the more they found patterns that pointed in one direction, then another, then circled back in a way that suggested deliberate misdirection. This wasn't just surveillance. It was a setup, a layered operation, a carefully crafted scheme, something meant to hide the true mastermind behind a maze of misleading trails. But one pattern kept returning. One connection repeated. One name reappeared. One network showed up in document after document. Camilla's external security circle. Not necessarily Camilla herself, but her orbit, her hires, her contractors, her extended administrative personnel, her decision-making chain. And this is where the story hits its most volatile point. Because the moment investigators presented these findings to William, he didn't react in anger. He reacted with something colder. Disbelief. Not disbelief that Camilla might be involved, but disbelief that no one questioned it earlier. He reportedly said, "How many times did they see the signs and ignore them?" This wasn't about one tracker anymore. It was about a long trail of red flags that went unaddressed. But there was still a missing piece, the question haunting everyone involved. What was the third device extracting? To answer that, investigators reviewed William's digital footprint for the 24 hours surrounding the event. And that's when they found it. A digital handshake, a microsecond-level connection between William's phone and an unidentified device between 7:43 p.m. and 7:44 p.m. Exactly the window the silhouette appeared near the car. Exactly the period when the ghost's signatures hit the access logs. Exactly the missing minutes in the corrupted timeline. This wasn't random. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't opportunistic. It was coordinated. Someone plucked data directly from William's device. But what data? That was the final trigger, the moment the palace realized the gravity of what had been taken. Because the extracted data wasn't personal. It wasn't financial. It wasn't related to his family or private life. It was political, meeting schedules, message drafts, confidential notes about upcoming transition protocols, discussions about long-term restructuring, a list of individuals William trusted for the future of the monarchy. This wasn't simply spying. It was strategic reconnaissance. Someone wanted to know exactly who William planned to empower and who he planned to remove. And the closer investigators traced the operation, the more the lines pointed toward one possible motive. Control. Control of narrative. Control of influence. Control of power as the monarchy prepares for its next chapter. And that brought investigators right back to the source of the tracker's manufacturing ID. The external contractor connected to Camilla's team. Not proven. Not confirmed. But implicated. Over and over again. And William reached a breaking point. Not publicly. Not theatrically. But internally. The kind of breaking point you never see in photographs or carefully crafted press statements. He stopped assuming coincidence. He stopped giving benefit of the doubt. He stopped trusting the system to regulate itself. And he said 7 words that would set off the next phase of the investigation. Camilla had a hand in this. He didn't say she planted the device. He didn't say she ordered surveillance. He didn't say she orchestrated the operation. He said she had a hand in it. Meaning influence. Meaning proximity. Meaning connection that could no longer be dismissed. And that is where the introduction ends, with William standing at the center of the largest internal security breach in modern royal history, facing the possibility that the most disturbing threat to his future came from inside his own palace walls. Have you ever watched an event so perfectly polished, so flawlessly choreographed, that you assume nothing could possibly go wrong? That was the Royal Variety Performance 2025, a night drenched in glittering lights, velvet curtains, and the smell of expensive perfume drifting through the air as London's elite gathered under one roof. To the millions watching at home, it looked like magic. But behind the scenes, it was a ticking clock. Because the danger didn't appear when William stepped on stage. It didn't appear when he sat in the royal box. It didn't appear during the standing ovations, the applause, or the closing bows. It appeared in the moment after the show ended. The moment the cameras stopped rolling. The moment the crowd poured outside. The moment William walked toward his car, unaware that every step he took brought him closer to a revelation that would shatter the palace's illusion of safety. But let's rewind just a few minutes. To the instant things began to feel off. It started with the lighting team. Not because anything malfunctioned, but because something didn't. The Royal Variety stage uses a timing program that automatically resets its lighting patterns at the end of the show. A technical ritual that has happened every single year without fail. But on this night, the head lighting technician noticed something strange. The automated reset didn't activate. A minor glitch? Maybe. Or maybe something else. Because when the technician tried to reset the program manually, the system stalled for exactly 22 seconds. Long enough for the backstage security system to flicker. Long enough for someone with intimate knowledge of event timing to use the flicker as a distraction. Long enough to create a tiny window, a window big enough for someone to act. But no one connected the dots yet. Because at the same time that reset malfunction happened, William stepped into the backstage exit corridor. And this is where the Real story begins. You see, William isn't escorted the way most think he is. There's no dramatic phalanx of guards. No swarm of black-suited agents pushing people aside. His protection style is precise. Quiet. Invisible to the public eye. Only a handful of people flank him at any time. Only 2 guards walk behind him. Only 1 walks ahead. So when his lead guard paused for just half a second, a pause so small that most people wouldn't notice, William noticed. Because pauses in protection are signals. Signals of uncertainty. Signals something feels wrong. Signals the rhythm of the moment has been broken. What is it? William asked quietly. The guard didn't answer. He simply pressed a finger to his earpiece, listening intensely. The second guard increased his pace slightly. The third positioned himself a step closer to William. Something wasn't right, but William still didn't know what. They continued down the hallway, passing crew members and performers who bowed politely, unaware of the tension building in the air. Outside, the crowd roared behind the barriers. William's presence always electrified the atmosphere, but tonight, that electricity felt colder, sharper. He stepped through the exit, and cameras instantly blinded him. The crowd surged forward, shouting his name. Security tightened. Photographers leaned over barricades, desperate for the perfect shot. Everything looked normal to everyone else. But William's guard team had switched patterns. That only happens when they sense a threat. And William knew the drill. If there is danger, stay calm. Never make sudden moves. Never show fear in front of cameras. Never reveal that anything is wrong. So he played his part. He smiled. He waved. He walked as if nothing unusual was happening, until he reached the car. And that's when the exact moment the entire scandal began, finally broke open. The guard walking ahead of him froze. Not dramatically, not with panic, but with a stiffness that communicated one thing: stop moving. William's instincts kicked in immediately. He halted. The guard behind him dropped half a step back, a protective move. The guard to his right placed his hand subtly near his jacket, ready. The crowd still surged behind the barriers, unaware that anything had changed. But inside the security team's earpieces, chaos whispered. William couldn't hear the exact words, but he heard the tone, and he saw the posture changes. Someone had seen something. What is it? He asked again, low and controlled. The guard didn't respond with words. He crouched, right there, in front of thousands of people, pretending to adjust a shoelace, pretending to check for road hazards, pretending everything was fine. But he wasn't adjusting anything. He was scanning. His fingers touched the underside of the car's frame, not casually, but deliberately. A second later, he spoke into his mic, confirming anomaly. William's heart dropped, because anomalies in a royal car usually mean one thing: a threat, a real one. Is it ours? Another guard asked through the comms. And that question, the one we now know triggered the entire investigation, told William this was serious. Because ours meant authorized. Ours meant safe. Ours meant part of their own equipment. And the guard's answer? No, it's not ours. William didn't react outwardly. Not a flinch. Not a blink. Not even a shift of breathing. But internally, everything changed. Because if it wasn't theirs, if it wasn't authorized, then someone else had breached the most secure vehicle in the monarchy, while surrounded by police, security, cameramen, and thousands of onlookers. Someone had gotten close enough to his car to attach something, without being caught. And that level of access only means two possibilities. The intruder was skilled enough to bypass all layers of security, or the intruder had help. But the worst part? The guard wasn't finished. He crouched deeper, looked again, then whispered something that made the entire team stiffen. It's wired in. Professionally. Professionally. That one word shifted the situation from eerie to catastrophic. Professionally installed devices on royal cars are not pranks. They're not opportunistic hacks. They're not made by amateurs or paparazzi. They're made by intelligence contractors, private firms, black budget operators, people who know how to infiltrate, people who know how to disappear, people who know exactly how to evade detection. Someone wanted to track William, but not where he went publicly, not his scheduled events, not his ceremonial duties. They wanted to track him after the performance, privately, secretly, in real time. Why? Who benefits from knowing William's off-grid movements? Who fears what he might do behind the scenes? Who wants access to his decision-making patterns before they become official? These questions would haunt the investigation for the next 72 hours. But in the moment, William was ushered into a secondary vehicle with a level of urgency usually reserved for assassination threats. The public had no idea. Social media praised the event. Paparazzi photos circulated. Tabloids speculated about William's suit. Videos of his smile went viral. Meanwhile, inside the palace, a storm had already started, because the tracker wasn't the only thing found that night. And the biggest shock, the detail that would unravel this entire scandal, hadn't even been discovered yet. As William sat inside the replacement vehicle, one thought, simple but chilling, crossed his mind. Whoever placed that device knew exactly where he'd be and when. Which meant the breach didn't start that night. It started before, days before, weeks before, maybe even months. And the truth waiting to be uncovered would be far darker than a single device. Something was hunting the future king long before he realized it. But what happened next, inside the palace security command room, would change everything. Because the footage captured outside the venue held a secret no one expected to see. A silhouette, a figure, someone who shouldn't have been there. And when investigators zoomed in, enhanced the frame, and analyzed the movement, they realized something horrifying. The person near the car walked like someone with training. Not civilian, not paparazzi, not staff. Trained. And that discovery would set off a chain reaction that exposed the first cracks in the palace's walls. Cracks pointing directly at a security network connected to Camilla's team. The security command room inside the palace is not glamorous. No gold trimming, no portraits, no royal symbols. Just screens. Dozens of them. A heartbeat of blinking lights, encrypted channels, and CCTV feeds that never sleep. At the time William was being transported in the secondary vehicle, the room was already buzzing, but not with noise. With silence. The kind of silence that only happens when everyone is watching the same thing and no one can yet believe what they're seeing. The footage, not the obvious footage. The press angles, the crowd shots, the glamorous fan videos. No, this was from a tiny, almost forgotten vantage point. A static camera facing the emergency exit lane behind the theater. The place no one ever pays attention to. The place the silhouette appeared. One of the analysts had pulled the feed not because anyone suspected it would hold answers, but because protocol demanded it. A routine sweep. Nothing more. But as the analyst fast-forwarded through the empty frames, something flickered into view. A shape. A movement. A person crossing the boundary line where no person should have been. Stop, the supervisor said. The analyst rewound. There. Hold it. The figure was barely visible. Dressed in black. Head down. Shoulders slightly hunched. And moving with a fluid confidence that screamed one thing. This was not a confused staff member. This was not a lost crew person. This was someone who knew exactly where they were going. Zoom in. The analyst zoomed. The quality didn't improve much. Nighttime CCTV only gives so much, but the posture was unmistakable. The steps were measured, almost gliding. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Not tentative. Whoever this is, one of the senior technicians whispered, they've done this before. Done what? Infiltrated? Scouted? Installed devices? Monitored targets? But the biggest question came from the head of security. How did this person get past 3 checkpoints? He said it softly, but the room still flinched. Because there's something people rarely understand about royal security. It's not just tight. It's layered. Checkpoint 1, venue perimeter. Checkpoint 2, staff access corridor. Checkpoint 3, vehicle perimeter. This silhouette bypassed all 3, with no sign of hesitation. Run gate analysis, the supervisor ordered. Now, gate analysis isn't magic. It can't produce a name out of thin air. But it can match physical patterns, shoulder angles, step cadence, hip rotation, foot pressure distribution. Trained individuals walk differently than civilians. When the system began generating preliminary matches, the technician frowned. This can't be right. What does it say? The supervisor asked. The technician swallowed hard. It's pulling matches from the contractor registry, not palace staff. Everyone in the room went silent. Because that contractor registry didn't belong to William, or to the general royal security staff, or to the event organizers. It belonged to Camilla's private security network. One of the names flagged was a contractor who had vanished from public record days earlier. Another was someone previously dismissed by Camilla's team after an internal disagreement. And the third match? A shadow operative known for temporary assignments, whose details were heavily redacted. Far too redacted for a simple private contractor. So the question changed from who got in to how many of them are involved. But here's the part that terrified the security staff most. There was no sign of forced entry. No tampering with the doors. No clipped wires. No hack locks. Whoever this was had a code. A legitimate one. Issued from within the palace system. Meaning someone with clearance either gave them access, or had their access duplicated without realizing it. Neither option is comforting. Back in the secondary vehicle, William noticed something subtle. One of the guards' hands was shaking. Just slightly, but enough. Not from fear, but from adrenaline. He'd never seen that before. What did they find? William finally asked. The guard didn't answer. He couldn't. Not until they were in a controlled environment. So William waited. Calmly, staring through the tinted window at the blur of London lights rushing past him. Inside the palace, the investigation deepened. The analysts scrubbed through more frames, trying to catch another angle of the silhouette. They found it, just for a moment, reflected in the glossy surface of a staff van parked nearby. And that reflection showed something the first angle didn't. The figure was carrying something. A small case. Hard shell. Matte black. Just big enough to hold equipment for installing or removing surveillance devices. Freeze that, the supervisor said. The analyst zoomed into the reflection. The resolution blurred, but the shape of the case remained clear. A case identical to those used by private intelligence contractors. The kind Camilla's security team used abroad. The kind the palace itself did not issue. The kind that doesn't pass through standard channels. This wasn't a guess anymore. Whoever placed that device had training. Precise training. Matching the profile of someone with intelligence field experience. But what really sent shivers through the room was what happened next in the footage. After approaching William's car, after crouching briefly, after making a subtle movement under the vehicle, the silhouette stood up, walked back into the shadows, and disappeared behind a corner. 10 seconds later, a staffer walked by, oblivious. Another followed, humming a song from the show. Neither reacted to anything unusual. This meant the operative wasn't lingering. They were executing. Fast. Clean. Professional. But then came the eerie part. When the camera's timestamp hit 7:44 p.m., the exact minute William's phone data registered a foreign handshake, the silhouette briefly reappeared. Only this time, they weren't installing anything. They were leaving. Mission complete. The supervisor's conclusion was immediate. This wasn't a trial run. This was an operation. But the operation wasn't over. Because the team noticed a strange detail. One that seemed small at first, but grew in importance by the second. The silhouette wasn't alone. In the far edge of the frame, barely visible, was another figure. Stationary. Watching. Not moving. Not participating. Just watching. A second operative? A handler? A lookout? A safeguard? But this figure moved differently. Slower. Heavier. Almost authoritative. This wasn't a contractor. This wasn't a technician. This was someone who didn't need to touch the car to be involved. Someone overseeing the operation. And their position, close enough to supervise, far enough to avoid detection, implied seniority. Someone high-ranking. Someone experienced. Someone confident. The moment that second shadow appeared, the room's atmosphere tightened. Because if there were two people involved, and both moved like they belonged there, then this operation wasn't rogue. It was coordinated. And coordination requires leadership. Now, here's the detail that made the supervisor's breath catch. The second silhouette's movement pattern, the gait, the stance, the weight distribution, matched someone from Camilla's extended administrative circle. Not a public figure, not a famous staff member, but someone who had been with her for years. Someone deeply trusted. Someone with access to event planning schedules. Someone with proximity to both domestic and international contractors. If that match was true, even tentatively, the implications were explosive. But the palace wasn't ready to accuse. Not yet. Not without definitive proof. However, William had to be told. And when he arrived at the palace and the head of security briefed him, he didn't interrupt. He didn't question prematurely. He didn't show fear. He listened. Still. Emotionless. Until the last detail. The second silhouette. That's when William leaned forward and asked one question. One that made everyone realize just how aware he had been of palace dynamics all along. Was it someone from her team? Her. He didn't need to say Camilla. Everyone knew who he meant. The head of security hesitated, not because he wasn't sure, but because he understood the consequences of confirming even a possibility. It's too early to say, sir, he answered carefully. William didn't blink. But it's not impossible. A statement. Not a question. Not speculation. A statement. And silence fell again. Because everyone knew the truth. Not impossible often means probable. This was the moment the palace crossed an invisible threshold from confusion.